Thanks for coming. This session's on the Office 365 track. It's the future of communication and collaboration in business. And hopefully what you'll get out of this session is some background into why we're where we are in terms of the technology and how we use collaboration in business today, and where Microsoft's taking the platform going forward. So a lot of the things that Jeremy talked about in the keynote, we're going to touch on and expand some of the reasonings and the direction that Microsoft's going there, and how that's going to change the way that we do, the way that we work, the way that we communicate with people within our workplaces. And we want this to be a pretty interactive session. You know, there's not lots of demos, lots of, there's no code in this session. This is supposed to be a conversation, particularly towards the end of the session, about what we've seen in our own workplaces and how we move forward on that. So I'm Ben Robb. I'm a SharePoint MVP, have been for 7 or 8 years now, and I co-host the London SharePoint user group, part of the SUG UK network, been involved in the SharePoint community and this conference every time, I think, so the last seven years. And I'm up on stage with Mark Stokes.
Yep, so I've got to use this microphone. I'm Mark Stokes. I'm also a SharePoint Server MVP. Just got my second year, which is really great. I organise the Manchester user group as well, so we're both heavily involved in that. Quick show of people familiar with the user group. Do you attend the meetings? Yeah, anyone not heard of the user group, not aware of it? People just don't like to put their hands up, that's fine. If you're not, then please do check it out, because you got a lot of speakers here going to it, so it's really cool. I run a small consultancy up in the northwest, doing all SharePoint Office 365 stuff. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do really is clarify some of the terms. So we talk about communication and collaboration. A lot of people use the terms to mean the same thing, but there are sort of differences to them, and I think they both play hand in hand. Communication for me is very much around people talking to each other, conversations and discussions, that kind of thing. And then collaboration is about people using a number of tools to actually achieve some results. So using some collaborative tools to actually come to some kind of decisions, generate some documents, that kind of thing. And communication is really one of the tools and mechanisms we use within collaboration. So sometimes we use the terms interchangeably, and sometimes we use them separately. I'll probably do both. So a bit of history on communication. Basically, spoken is the first form of communication that people have had. We're used to talking to each other. We've done it for an awful long time. It's a really good way to get that information across. We all know through information theory, it's not really about what you say, it's how you say it a number of times and the mannerisms and gestures that you get. And we've always had to communicate with people. We've always had to communicate with customers, suppliers, other employees in business. It's always been there. But some of the drawbacks that we have are that it's not really a very good way of recording what happens. So we don't have any memory of those conversations. Once we've had the conversation in a spoken format, it's gone. So what you find is two different people will remember a conversation differently. My wife's a solicitor. She does her own advocacy, and it's quite well known that you can actually change the way people remember things by the way you word questions. So we need to remember those conversations in some way. So first of all, we had sort of paper, we could write meeting notes, and then we have some form of evidence to go back to if there's a dispute on what happens in conversations. So we need a way of really recording that. And then sort of through the 80s, we really got into electronic communication, so email became more prevalent. Email is still definitely the most popular way of communicating in a digital form. And that's really interesting as to why that still is. So we find email really is still king. It is definitely the most popular. And the reasons for that are because it's quick. You can get a message out really, really quickly within a matter of a few seconds. It's really fast. It's easy, it's simple, it's true cross-platform. No matter what operating system you use, what mobile device you use, it's cross-platform. Everyone has access to it and it's compatible, and that's a massive power. Everyone has an email address, so again, everyone is subscribed to it. If you go to Facebook, then not everyone has a Facebook account. If you go to Yammer, not everyone has a Yammer account. If you go to Twitter, not everyone has a Twitter account. Pretty much every single person in here has an email address. Who doesn't have an email address? Yeah, not only jokers. So it literally is. You know, everyone's got access.
Anyway.
Yeah, it doesn't do any work. He just manages. So the other thing with email as well is email supports collaboration. We can send documents through email. We can collaborate with people. We can have conversations around that document within the email system. We have workflow built into email. We can email out a group of people, get their opinion, get their approval, then go and email somebody else, and we have approval in there. As a collaboration tool, it's almost a perfect technology. But is it? Basically, it is good because of its simplicity. What we find is people will take the path of least resistance to get the job done. Often that's email. Okay? But it does come with a lot of drawbacks as well. I mean, most people are probably familiar with inbox hell. Yeah, I know as soon as I get an email, 2 hours later it's gone, it's lost. Just because so much comes in. We have a lot of clutter and a lot of spam. I think I'm starting to understand what the difference is between clutter and spam. I think clutter is the spam that you want. Also, you get CC'd on a lot of emails, so you get a lot of noise in the system as well. So there is a hell of a lot of emails that really go around. It's very difficult to find old emails. It's very difficult to search it. I spend a lot of my time in the day just searching through old emails and just trying to find a memory of what's happened. You get some smug users who then say, that's okay, I've got a really great filing system in my email. Every email that comes in, I can file it into a project folder. It's great. They're really smug until I go and send them an email that talks about 2 different projects. And then they don't know which folder to put it in, or whether they duplicate it. On the workflow system, it's not that great, because if we are emailing documents around to get approval for people, then we know that documentation is locked away in inboxes. We have duplicate copies. People get spammed on that workflow, because I don't know who I need to send it to, so I'll send it to everybody who's involved in this workflow. Somebody might pick it up, and then they'll email off to everyone else. So it's quick and it's easy, but it's not necessarily the most effective, and I think that's some of the problems that we face with email. But it's going to be there for a long time, and we know it is. So what do we do? So that's around the communication side of things. On collaboration, so we've always needed to work together. Ever since we've started business, ever since the scribes back in Greece and Egypt have started writing on stone tablets, they've known the need a way to actually record what they're saying, share their thoughts and opinions, and we've kind of moved through those generations. Digital collaboration took over in the 90s, probably a bit early, but really took off through the 90s with things like network file shares. So that's how we started to share information once we realized we need to share our electronic information. Had things like bulletin boards as well, so people started to have those communication channels that they want to within that digital forum. And then obviously through the early 2000s, we started to use things like SharePoint. SharePoint's become really, really quite popular. We know that's why we're here. We all love it. We all want to use it. And if we're honest, it doesn't always live up to its expectations, does it? We promise an awful lot with SharePoint, and sometimes we don't necessarily get it. And I think the main 2 reasons for that are the solutions that we build off SharePoint are very complex, and it is expensive. Okay? It's fairly expensive to buy. Office 365 obviously makes that a lot more accessible. But when you start looking at the professional services fees and consultancy fees you have to bring in, it does get expensive. So again, it's not ideal, but I think it's got us all to a really good place of where we are. So I think we take stock of what we're looking at now, and then when the future, and then Ben can talk about how that's now expanding to give us more of the leverage and hopefully solve more of the issues that we've been facing. One of the examples on the complexity and the expense that I want to talk about is the concept of site collections. So one of the benefits of site collections in SharePoint is that it's given us the ability to scale our SharePoint environments up to a proper enterprise level. Okay, not a lot of alternative products can really scale the same way that SharePoint can. But site collections give us an inherent problem. When we're designing complex solutions, they're great, but they also give us a bit of a bind. And it's been a bit of a limiting factor in a lot of the solutions that I design, because we have to try and fit content within various locations. So if we take an example of a projects area, then maybe we have a different sub-site or a different site collection for each project, and it's nice and simple. We can create a document library, a task list in each of those project sites, and it's nice and simple. I'm working on project 1 and project 3, therefore my documentation goes into project 1 and 3. So when I go to my project site, I know exactly where I am, what I'm doing, what information relates to me. But then we find maybe management needs some dashboards. So we need to do some content aggregation. We can pull that over. Within a site collection, it's really easy to do. We've never had much problems. But what happens when this stuff gets too big, when we have too much information? What happens when I need to store a document that relates to Project 1 and Project 3? It's that same email filing structure problem. Where do I put it? Do I duplicate it? Do I put it in one and then reference it in the other? It gets quite difficult. What happens when this goes above that magical 200 gigabytes limit that we always were told we can't go over? So what sometimes we do on large projects, we break it down. Maybe we have a document storage area. So we have a document library or a number of document libraries that we can scale, and then maybe a presentation layer. So we can actually then pull the content over, and that's how we scale our large projects out. But this comes with its own problems as well. If I'm in here looking at a project dashboard, and then I want to access a document, if I click the link, I generally get taken to the document storage area. So I lose the context of the site I'm in. So site collections are good, and they give us a really good way of scaling things up. But I think there's a better way. I think the biggest problem I find is we too tightly associate our content storage with our content presentation. And that's what we're trying to do. When we design it, we're trying to think, as a user, I need to know where to go to put my content, and I need to know where to go to find my content. And with these kind of design solutions that we bring in for apps, I think we just struggle, sorry, I shouldn't use the word apps, we struggle to know, we try to tie them together too much. We think about it in the single solution, but maybe there's a better way to actually leverage that. We also end up with complex permissions as well if we do this document storage, and how do we set permissions on items and stuff like that. So going around communication and collaboration, Microsoft's introduced social. Social is something that's very popular now. We use it in the consumer world all the time. So obviously it makes sense that we bring it into our enterprises. Social is a difficult one to pick up for businesses because a lot of businesses don't like to give up control. Social is more uncontrolled than people are used to. So through SharePoint 2010 and 2013, we get similar concepts with our news feeds and everything, the way to share and have conversations with it within SharePoint. Some of the drawbacks here is we find that this information tends to only be surfaced within SharePoint. So we need to stay within SharePoint to consume these conversations. It's not very easy to just pick up a mobile device and then to follow all those social conversations. And we find a lot of people these days really want to consume information on multiple devices. On the content side of things, don't worry, this is just an image I stole off Google Images. Sorry, Bing Images. But we need to think about information lifecycle management. So the other stuff that we have to consider is, like I said before, when we're storing content and consuming content, what do we do? How do we do it? What's the lifecycle we do? Again, we're finding that we are generating more information now than we ever have done. I can't remember the exact stats, but it's something like in the last 2 or 5 years, we've generated more content than the whole of history of mankind or something. It's crazy. So we need to think about how do we manage content properly? How do we store information? For me, let's take the example of me as a HR person. I'm generating a new policy. I need to store the information on my desktop or in my OneDrive or in my documents folder, and only I have interest in that. If anyone else sees it, it's just noise. When I'm ready to share it with my team, then I want to put it to somewhere that they can have a look at it. They can give me some feedback, maybe approve it, make some amendments, and then we need to publish it somewhere, maybe the internet, that the rest of the business can actually consume it. So that whole lifecycle management needs to be accounted for as well. Any questions on history and updates? Yep. Hopefully I'm just telling you stuff that you all already know, and it's to set the scene for going forward. So the other thing that I've done over the last couple of months is I've put a little survey out as well, and I've been trying to get some people to submit to it. It might not be easy to see with the colours on there, but I just wanted to get an interest on what different communication channels that people prefer to use. So I asked 2 questions on my survey. How old are you? So which age bands do you fit in? And what communication channels do you use? I specifically didn't ask for business and consumer. I just wanted to see what people come up with. So this is just showing the age distribution of who answered. It was purely anonymous, so I don't know who they are, because I did want to try and get the 15 to 19-year-olds in as well. I wanted to get the younger generation in. I only got a couple of responses from them. But then we can see that most people responded in the 30 to 40, the 30 to 50 years, which is typically the people in business who saw the survey. So when we look at it, we need to bear in mind what the age distribution is. So the second question I asked was, what are your preferred communications channels? And do you use it, love it, hate it? That's all the options, just to get a very generic view. So this is showing the 15 to 24-year-olds, the 25 to 40-year-olds are blue, the 40 to 50-year-olds are in red, and the black ones are the 50 plus. So we can see what the peaks are. It's a bit difficult to read, but we can see that email is very high on each of them. Twitter is fairly high. WhatsApp gets a peak on most of them. Text message SMS was a surprising one, and that was one of the most popular. So this is the most loved. I'm going to flip through these into this one. So what I've done as well, so basically the most used, I've just put them in order so we can actually start to relate it. So we can see WhatsApp is consistently high for the younger people. I don't mean to offend anybody over 40. I'm not saying you're old. But we can see that we drop off just slightly. So I think these are more popular. Email is consistently top on most used. Text message is consistently high. Facebook is consistently high as well. This surprised me a bit. I was expecting Facebook to drop down a bit. From a lot of the anecdotes I know, the younger people are still using Facebook, but generally it's people like us, middle-aged people who are sharing pictures of their kids now, so they don't tend to be on it so much. But it's still high. Voice mobile is consistently high. Yammer's consistently in the middle as well. What else do we have on there? So that's the most used. So they're fairly consistent, I think, across the board. But when we start looking at the most loved, we can find that WhatsApp is high, drops off a little bit. Email is slightly lower down for the younger generations. Email's top, most loved technology for the older people. And let's think about who are making our business decisions on how we need to establish our business. It's these people here. So what happens when you start trying to think about the next generation of worker that comes into the business? How are they going to come into your organization and communicate? What technologies do they want to use, what they're used to using? How many kids, 15 to 25, well, 15 to 20, don't really use emails much? Ofcom last year published a story saying that landline and email is massively dropped for the younger people. What we've got, so Facebook is quite highly loved, WhatsApp's high. Again, text message is the most loved. And I think it's people want that short communication method. They don't want to write long items. Handwritten letter is one that's consistently low as well, so Google Hangouts doesn't do very well. Then on the most hated, this is interesting, email, most hated, down there. So we do start to see some, there's about 80 people submitted to this, so it's certainly not a Gartner survey, but it does actually highlight some interesting areas. Most hated, voice mobile, up here, and then most hated is lower down for older, so actually the newer generations are not interested in talking to people. I think parents probably know that 15 to 20-year-olds don't want to talk to them. Yammer's an interesting one. It kind of jitters a bit, so I think people are still finding where that's established. Anything else interesting on there? Facebook Messenger, hated up here is the top hated one. So I think that shows some interesting thoughts on what the different age groups want to use for communication. So I think that sets the scene a little bit.
Yep, absolutely.
Doing on time, yep.
Thanks, Mark. So I'm going to spend the rest of the time, first of all, sort of laying out where Microsoft's going in the new world of collaboration. And really, in doing that, I'm going to talk about three main drivers that I think the research that Mark did backs up. I think the first is around breaking down silos of information. So, it's great, email, as we saw earlier. It's very easy to use, but nobody else can use that content because it's in your mailbox. The sort of second main area is around the explosion of mobility and the ability to access and work and communicate and collaborate from anywhere, from any device. And we saw, again, on the research, there's an explosion of different types of communication, and people want to be able to do that anywhere. There's that list of 30 different communication methods means that there is that fragmentation. So thinking about breaking down silos, traditionally SharePoint and Office 365 has been very siloed in its approach to building applications. Information that's stored in SharePoint, in site collections, that's where it is, that's where it stays. You can use search to slightly mitigate that, but it's very siloed. It's very difficult to get and access that content. Again, OneDrive for business, that's another silo that's completely separate. It's got different ways of interacting. It's got not a great consistency between them. Looking at Yammer, you've got a lot of cross capabilities that you've got conversations, you've got attachments, you've got likes and other social context in Yammer, but you've also got those same concepts in SharePoint, and there's a big disconnect. And then Exchange, that big dumping ground for the organization. Probably everyone in this room gets several hundred emails a day, and it's really difficult to keep on top of that. So that's really the first big challenge that Microsoft are looking to get past with the new world of collaboration. The second is around accessing anywhere from any device, and Microsoft are really moving a long way towards resolving this. Their cross-platform support is better than it's ever been. It's going to increase. The announcements that Jeremy made in the keynote today around new versions for a lot of the client tools in Android, in the iOS platforms, and continuing with the Windows 10 initiative to unify all of these different screen sizes and different communication methods going forward. And additional ones as they come out. So as augmented reality becomes more prevalent with the HoloLens, with other competing products from Oculus Rift and Google and so on, the ability to access information wherever you are, on whatever device you are, and in a context that's good for you to do that is going to be increasingly important. And it's really a key initiative across the whole of what Microsoft's doing. And then the third sort of major area, that sort of builds from what we just talked about the silos of information, breaking that down, the device independence, getting information from anywhere, is really changing the conversation away from storage and consuming of that content being the same thing. Moving away from saying, I need to architect and design my applications, my solutions in SharePoint, or my structures in OneDrive or in Exchange, based on how I'm going to consume that content, or how I'm going to store that content. Those are often very different things. How I consume that content might be a very different way, and how I can optimize that consumption might be very difficult to do while still maintaining security, compliance, metadata, and the underlying storage layer. So what we're going to see in all of Microsoft products going forward, particularly in the Office 365 suite, is a breaking of that connection between where we store it and how we consume that. And that really opens up a whole new world of possibilities. And this is already happening, right? This is not something that's going to be coming in a year's time, in 18 months' time. Right now, there are products that are in the Office 365 suite that are really, if you look at them as a first iteration of changing the whole conversation away from being content and storage, consumption and storage having to be together, from being locked down to individual, the same experience has to be there on every device, rather than an optimized experience for that workload, for that task that you're trying to achieve right then and there with that device. So, looking around those, we've got Delve. That's a completely new way of looking at how you consume information that's got nothing to do with where you're storing that content. So that's powered by the Office Graph. It's driving information up through the process to show what's important to the user right then and then. And that's a clear breakdown breaking of the link between the content and the consumption. The video portal, and in fact, all the next-gen portals that are coming down the road, this is going to be a model that's going to be used across many different workloads. And video portal is the one that we have right now that's available, but the processes that we talk about are exactly the same for other scenarios, other workloads going forward. And again, that's breaking down the connection between where stuff's stored, the workload in uploading and creating that content versus using the best mechanisms to consume that content across multiple devices. And then some of the old silos of information and the switching context between the content creation applications and some of the more social nature of working in collaboration. So the joining of the Office client tools with Yammer natively. So a lot of work already happening, already available in Office 365 today. And just bringing that into more reality, and I might switch out to just show you this for real. So yeah, so just switching to a slightly different view of that. This is a standard Excel online spreadsheet, and over here on the right-hand side, I can instantly start a Yammer conversation and communicate with my team and collaborate on that document without changing context. And I can view that within my Yammer feed. I can instantly connect back to that Excel sheet. If I'm already in that Yammer feed as a context, as a user context, I don't have to switch back to another context to do that. Whereas if I'm creating the content and working on that content, again, I can do that without having to go out to another application. And really, this idea of having the ability to consume and collaborate and work with information, regardless of how you, regardless of what the context of what you're doing, and not having to change context, is really powerful. It's going to make a big difference to how people use these products. And what it means is it becomes less important whether you get Yammer adoption or SharePoint adoption, because as long as people are working with those tools in the way that they want to work, with the devices that they want to use, with the mashup of different applications and content, that's going to enable them to do the work that they want. It also means you can be a lot faster in being able to roll out new capabilities. So another area that we're seeing quite a lot of traction in the workplace, in the Office 365 world right now is around how people work together and collect together things. And this builds on Mark's example earlier of documents in sites, and then some of the other things that you might have within those sites are going to be created and forever locked within that site in the old traditional way of working with team sites. So calendars, tasks, documents, conversations, all those things, they're locked in a team site, and it's possible but very difficult to drag that out into a consistent format that I can use in other contexts. So if I wanted to have a single view of all my tasks or a single view of all my calendar items, not in SharePoint, I don't want to look at a web page. For calendar items, that's something I want in line with the tool I use for calendars, which is Outlook. I don't want to have to go to a website to find that stuff out. And you can do some point-to-point integration in sort of traditional team sites. I can surface a calendar from a team site within Outlook, but it's not intuitive and it's not scalable, from an end user's perspective. Because if they're in one team site, that's fine, but that's not the case. In most organizations, you're going to be members of many, many, many team sites with all of those different assets in there. And so Microsoft have started releasing a set of products around a groups theme. And there is some confusion in the marketplace about, is groups a replacement for team sites? Are team sites going away? The answer to that is they're not going away. There are definite use cases still for team sites. Team sites are still going to be invested in and move forward. But for a lot of scenarios that we today use team sites for, quick collaboration, some basic team-based work rather than project-based work, it's a bit of a brittle and unyielding object to have to put it into a team site. Difficult to reuse. And so if we have a look at that, if I go into my mailbox, here we can see a new feature down here, which is called groups. And I can browse groups, or I can quickly create a group in the application that I'm using right now. And I can do this from my mailbox, but I can also do this from other applications. So if I just do an SP Evo one, click create. I'll skip that step to add new users, but it's a very quick, easy way of doing that. And whereas in the past, this group would be tightly coupled to a team site individual structure and not really accessible here. Here I can quickly see conversations from within the client that I'm used to, that I'm using, my email application, my Outlook mailbox. If I wanted to go into, if I wanted to have files, like a document library, and I click into that, when that loads, what you see is I come into my OneDrive, because that's where files are. So, I'm not. If I'm working with files, I'm in OneDrive. If I'm working on conversations, well, that's an email thing. Yammer is coming at some point. Yammer integration. It's not there yet, but it'll be the same concept. You'll be able to say, I want to have a sort of conversation in email versus a conversation in Yammer, and you might have different sets. And again, when I'm looking at my calendar, my group calendars are just instantly available and up there within my context. And so when we think about what that actually means from what's going on under the hood and how that's changing the way that people think about SharePoint and team sites, we're no longer having to go to a website to get this context, to get the content and work together on information. I can come straight to the application that I want to consume that in. I can go to, under the hood, there's a team site. Under the hood, the documents in that in that OneDrive folder, those are actually in SharePoint. They're not in OneDrive, but they're being surfaced through OneDrive. And this really is the sort of key feature that they're looking at delivering. And so you get your mail, your OneDrive, your calendar. You manage the permissions through the people area. So it's really intuitive and it's mashing up information from lots of different sources. So if you think about it from another point of view, when I'm in my calendar, I can see all of my actions, all of my milestones, all of my calendar items, regardless of where they are. And I don't have to do any additional work or configuration or click a button in the website ribbon to connect and all the rest of it. It's just there. Similarly for files. When I'm in my OneDrive, I've got my personal OneDrive, but I've also got my my views of the documents that have been created. And then building on all of this, you've then got Delve. So you've got Office Graph, managing all of this communication and providing a lot of the hooks that these applications are consuming, and then enabling you to do that at scale. So the next sort of application that I want to talk about is really the first instance of the next-gen portals idea. And that's the Office 365 video player. And that was shown in the keynote a little bit. I've got a quick view as well. But again, thinking about those basic tenets that we talked about earlier, device independence, access anywhere, breaking down the connection between content, location, and consuming that content. Office 365 video is a good case study for how that's being done. And if we think about what's actually going on under the hood in Office 365 video, up here we've got our consumption of videos and our interactions with end users. And that's not a traditional SharePoint app. That's a standalone application that then just makes use of some of the underlying services that SharePoint Online gives us. So when I create content, that's being stored initially in SharePoint Online. It's got metadata from the metadata service. It's using search. It's hooked in natively. Because it's stored in SharePoint, it's hooked in natively into the Office Graph. I can manage security and compliance and content lifecycle in exactly the same way I would with content in a SharePoint Online site, but I'm not constrained by the way and the storage model in here. I'm not constrained by that when I'm thinking about how I want my end users to consume that content. And in addition, for that, behind the scenes, what's happening is that content's being pushed over to Azure Media Services, where it's doing a whole bunch of work to retranscode, recode to different file sizes, to different devices. So instead of there just being a single, maybe high-def video up here, Azure Media Services is doing the adaptive streaming, pushing me the content that's appropriate for my device when I'm viewing it, for my connection speed, for all the rest of it. And under the hood, it's all using Active Directory, Azure Active Directory to make sure that that's still secure, which again is used by SharePoint Online. And then over here, I don't want to write my own commenting system and rating system because Yammer's already got that. So I'm going to use that rather than doing that directly. And so what we see is really something that we haven't really seen in traditional SharePoint apps. I find my mouse. So what we see is when we go into a video portal, And I'm looking at this through a standard monitor, standard PC size, so I get this experience. But if I was looking at it on an iPhone or a Windows phone or whatever, I would get an optimized experience for that. And I think we're moving beyond the point where we expect a device that's that big or even that big to have the same user experience as a device that big. We're trying to do different things. We want to access that content in different ways, but we still want that content. And so having the ability to break away from the traditional SharePoint model of app development and into a completely new world gives us a lot of capabilities to do this. And so if I come in, for those that haven't seen this, we've got channels, so I can come into the Evo conference. I can click through into a video, and this is really optimized for what I need to do right now, and I can at the same time start leveraging some of the other platforms. So mashing up services and SharePoint and Exchange and Yammer and so on really becomes a provider of services rather than the mechanism for consuming. And we also see this in, if I just go back and go into Delve. So Delve is the front end onto Office Graph. And again, none of this content is being stored within Delve, within Office Graph, but it's being surfaced, and it's providing value based on not just where that content is and what that content is, but also how other people around you are interacting with that. So just to sort of tie up this, the next-gen portals is where Microsoft's going with a lot of their work. I mean, they are still investing in the other products. But next-gen portals really will enable you within your business to build more interesting, more compelling applications and decouple that. So, focused on intelligence through leveraging Office Graph, focusing on mobile with all the REST APIs, the OData APIs, social being a key feature that's going to drive adoption going forward, and most importantly, being able to do that really quickly in an agile fashion rather than having to wait for a big cycle, and decoupling the underlying architecture from how people are consuming that information. So at this point, we thought we would have an open conversation with the room to really start thinking about, if this is where the platform's going, and this isn't, by the way, this isn't just Microsoft doing this. If you look at all of the other vendors in the collaboration space, they're all moving towards this sort of model of decoupling the interface from the storage, of being available for use anywhere on any device. What do you think is going to be challenging within your organizations to changing the mindset for people? So
good. Okay.
We'll stick around here.
Yeah, if you want to have a chat.